Lechi lach to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha to a place you do not know. Lechi lach on your journey I will bless you. And you.
Well, actually, Ashel was our speaker before, so I did not plan. But Ashel is a wonderful speaker, a specialist in Bible and archaeology. He is a very experienced tour guide, and he's a coordinator of a tour guide's course in Jerusalem right now. He is a resident of Jerusalem. He is a native English speaker. He is a colleague of mine, and I'm very proud and happy to have him as our final speaker for this season. And he will be talking about the most important figure in Jewish history, and that's King David, of course. So here we are. Asher, we are looking forward to listening to you.
Yeah, someone muted me, sorry. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And I am excited here to be the last speaker of the season. Hopefully this will pick up again in the fall. What we have for this afternoon or evening, whichever it may be, is a look into really one of the most hotly debated sites and topics of the last decade in the field of biblical archaeology. The story, which will begin in a moment, is a fascinating one. There are lots and lots of details, and there have been multiple excavations and publications and seminars and lectures. And what I'd like to try to do is really summarize what the main issues are, and hopefully that will help clarify where the debate is as we speak. And it's an ongoing one. Hello? Am I here?
Yeah. We're listening. I'm listening.
Okay. You're okay, great. Okay, something froze here. Okay, so let's get started. The year is 2006, and the Sar Ganor, who is a ranger with the Israel Antiquities Authority, then you recall that Pakach. His responsibility, particularly in the area of the Judean lowlands, is to supervise the ancient sites. This is in 2006 when the separation fence was not a physical barrier through the whole of the area, and there were multiple accounts of theft and vandalism, and his job was to drive around in his pickup truck and his Jeep and supervise. And on one of his routine surveys, he noticed something very peculiar. What he noticed was after noticing this, he initiates first just an explorative excavation, and then it goes to a full-scale excavation, and what he finds is going to send a ripple through the entire world of biblical archaeology that is still can be felt. The aftershocks can be still felt today. To understand what Sar Ganor found, we have to first go back to the origins. We all are familiar with the story of King David. The Bible describes a shepherd who eventually grows into being a military hero, a national hero, a king, and then a king who rules over not just his local region, but up to what we would consider today a mini empire. Now, this being said, scholars in biblical commentary and in recent, more recent modern criticism have obviously thought maybe some of it might be a little bit exaggerated, but nonetheless, the basic story was retold over and over and over. Now, when we meet modern biblical archaeological study, one of the first names that comes to mind is William Foxwell Albright. Hailing from Baltimore, the John Hopkins University, he was really one of the forerunners of the entire field today. He excavated physically in many sites and was a pioneer in the field. Now, William Foxwell Albright had a very it's sometimes called conservative, but I would better state it as a very accepting attitude towards the biblical story, the biblical narrative, its authenticity. His particular expertise was that he was able to really read all of the literature and the recent excavations that were made in the early 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, and combined all them to a picture in which the Bible and its stories would fit into their appropriate context. So he began his exploration, and his students that followed him, particularly in Israel, Yigael Yadin, and his students, who were my teachers in Hebrew University, Amichai Mazar, Amnon Bentor, and Eilat Mazar, continued this attitude towards the biblical stories, of obviously checking them with the context that were found in the excavations. In the case of Amnon Bentor, his excavations in Chatzor, Ami Mazar, his excavations in Philistine sites, Tel Kasila, and later in the north with Rehov. And so there's and Eilat Mazar, we're going to see a little later on, her excavations in the city of David. And so what we have is a front of scholars who are both have the Bible in one hand and the shovel and the more or less a brush. You don't always use a shovel, excavating on the other hand, and trying to find where the stories in the Bible and where the archaeological record work in tandem. And in general, for much of what they were finding is that there was this congruence. Along comes mid-1990s, Professor Israel Finkelstein. You've seen some of his colleagues, I think, in the past, Yuval Gadot and others. And he was not the only, but he was definitely the most outspoken archaeologist from the Tel Aviv University who challenged this position, this school, we'll call it, that came out of Jerusalem, the world of Albright and the world of Yigael Yadin students. And his challenge was on a number of different fronts, and that's exactly where we're going to meet our site today. First and foremost, he had an archaeological claim, and that is that the large buildings that we're finding, whether they were palaces or storehouses or stables or walls in various sites throughout the land, Megiddo, Chatzor, Jerusalem, were not from the 10th century, as previously thought, 10th century being the time of David and Solomon, but rather belonged to the 9th century. His primary claim was that there was a severe misreading of the pottery, which is the record, the archaeology, which later he supported with carbon dating of olive pits and other organic materials, primarily from the excavation that he was responsible for in Megiddo. He took over the excavations in Megiddo that we're going to mention shortly. And he came with this notion that, number one, the archaeology does not fit this picture of a great empire in the 10th, 11th, 10th century. Namely, the stories of Saul, David, Solomon do not have an appropriate matching archaeological context that they would fit in. So that's number one. In addition to this, Finkelstein publishes with the assistance of Neil Usher Silberman, a rewriting of the biblical story that would better fit the archaeological record as he understood it. Namely, the claim is that obviously something happened. The Israelites did appear on the scene. There is an historical Israel, but both with the understandings, and those of you that were with us last time, of biblical criticism, that the biblical stories represent legends that were only brought down to the writing in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, before the destruction of the first temple and the first Commonwealth. And therefore, when basically what he does in both this book and in subsequent books and articles is he tries to retell the stories of the Bible the way he believed they happened. And that would be a topic of a completely separate lecture. We don't have the time for that today. But understand that his challenge was on many different fronts. He claims, and I'm only going to give the major issues, that number one, the Exodus story does not have historical context. It is just legend. The Israelites developed from a local Canaanite subgroup, that there was never a united kingdom of Saul, David, or Solomon that ruled over both the northern and southern tribes as one, and that the third, which is somewhat minor to the other claims, but I think we're going to see is going to be very important, is that the Bible's story, particularly regarding the King Ahab, who we know was much more successful than the Bible would like to. The Bible describes him. We have evidence of Ahab as being this great leader internationally. Then the Bible is somewhat minimized. And so with that, we have two different perspectives. One coming from our Jerusalem school, and you can see that William Deaver in America also, and he's not the only one. These are just the most outspoken, but they're really developed almost like two camps. And this continues until 2005. In 2005, there was a big conference in Detroit where they basically summarized all of the things that we've been discussing up until now. And then, and just to mention, let's say, one of the hotly debated topics, just to give a sense of what we're speaking about, in the major tells, the major cities of Chatzor and Gezer and Megiddo, they found a set of gates. Now, not just any gates, but 6-chambered gates. Now, why is this interesting? Because in all three sites we find very similar gates, and there's a much more dramatic story to this. But to summarize quickly, the claim of Yigal Yadin and his followers is that all of these gates, which are the same type of style, here we see Megiddo, and we have here is a closer picture of Megiddo. This is Gezer. They represent what is mentioned in the Bible, Book of Kings, that the purpose of the forced labor of Solomon imposed, it was to build the house of the Lord, his own palace, the Milo, the walls of Jerusalem, and to fortify, lo and behold, Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And therefore, if you go to any of those sites today, you'll see a sign saying Solomonic Gates. Well, what Finkelstein and his and his fellow archaeologists of this new dating would claim is that the Megiddo dates are not from the time of Solomon. They're from 100 years later, from the time of Ahab. It's quite a complex archaeological claim to do so, and I'm not going to spare you that right now, but just so you understand what the debates are about. And thus, if these gates belong to the time of Ahab and not Solomon, the time period, the level that's underneath, is much less impressive and should not necessarily be associated with some great kingdom of Solomon coming from Jerusalem. So that is one topic. And thus we're left with, and to summarize where we're standing in 2005, is that this picture that we have of the kingdom of David spanning from Eilat all the way, or Solomon and David all the way up to the Euphrates, is definitely not realistic, but rather an exaggeration. Now, we do have evidence from the Donning inscription that was found of the kingdom of David. It says a king from the house of David, but this does not prove whether or not the question that we asked, was David a mighty king, or was he just a small shepherd or chieftain that ruled over? And the city of David, we don't really have the time now. Also, Eilat Mazar finds remains that she believes belong to a palace that also belongs to the city of David. Now, it was already excavated in the 1920s by R.A.S. McAllister, but McAllister did a very poor job, and even though he cleared out most of the remains, this very large building, and you can only see part of it here, which Eilat, as I said, and identifies this as a palace. Along comes Finkelstein and says that these remains belong to the 9th century, again 100 years later. Okay, so this is the publication in 2005 that I was referring to, based on the lectures in Detroit. Amichai Mazar representing the Jerusalem side, and Finkelstein representing the Tel Aviv side. We have the position that more or less the biblical stories represent some type of reality and realistic truth, and Tel Aviv school saying that would be impossible because the archaeological data does not support it. And now we're back to our story of Sar Ganor. What does Sar Ganor find? He is in the Elah Valley. That's the valley that the battle of David and Goliath was said to have taken place. He sees on this hill, which was known by the local shepherds as Khirbet Qeiyafa. That means the Qeiyafa ruin, not a tell, but a ruin, okay, which was surrounded by a wall, but everybody just assumed it was a wall built by the local farmers and that were either keeping the animals out or keeping the animals in. And you can see here, this is a map from the PWF, the Palestine, the survey of Western Palestine. You can see that Khirbet Qeiyafa is already known. So it's not that it was nobody knew it, and it was already known as having ruins because Yehuda Dagan did his full survey of this area in expectation that the then small neighborhood of Beit Shemesh, Ramat Beit Shemesh, would expand and eventually want to build. And therefore, if they have remains, they were going to look at it. So Yehuda Dagan had this as part of his survey, but he just said there are remains from the biblical period and remains from the Byzantine period, and that's all. But what Sar Ganor finds, and what later is going to be excavated, is going to amaze everyone. You see, look carefully at the wall. This is the wall that exists, that surrounded the entire top of this hill. But look at these stones. These are massive, and they're not naturally there. Someone brought these stones and placed them there. And this is what Sar said. This cannot be just a farmer. Farmers don't lift stones like this to keep goats in or to keep foxes out. So what is it? So what did he do? Now he was a ranger and a supervisor. He knew his stuff, but he called one of the professors that he was close with in university, whose name was Joseph Garfinkel, who up until this point had done a little bit of biblical archaeology beforehand, but primarily focused on prehistoric archaeology. And they began a small excavation. This is in 2006 and in 2007. And they started to uncover an unbelievably strong wall as part of the fortification that was definitely not just a mere wall built by local farmers. And you can see here part of this excavation as they uncovered it in 2007 and 2008. Okay, now what's so interesting about this site and why this site has become so important is because there are many other biblical mounds in this area, but most of them had already been excavated by R.A.S. McAllister. The one was in Jerusalem. They were done very quickly and very comprehensively at a time that archaeology was not yet ready to really understand what they were looking at. And so basically they were ruined. That's Azekah and Beit Shemesh. I mean, Beit Shemesh wasn't McAllister, but the same idea. And so this site is an untouched site that before this had never been explored. What do they find? They found three basic time periods, meaning there was no tell that was multi-layered like Megiddo with 22 layers or Chatzor 21 layers. This had three basic layers. The top layer, again, other than the modern, was a Byzantine farmhouse. And in 2009, I was part of the team that helped excavate that. We were looking for the second layer, which is from Alexander the Great. This fortress was reused, or this outpost was reused in the time of Alexander the Great. We found some pretty interesting coins from that. But underneath that was a one layer, meaning there was one time period it was used. And when was this from? You can see here the outline of the excavations as they were completed over the next 3 or 4 years. You can see a few things about how they're pulling out the pottery and the unbelievable finds from this site. So when was this built? Who were the people, and why? What is it doing there? What does it tell us? And so the first tool is pottery. This is the most useful tool for an archaeologist. It's in most abundance, and as you can see here, it has clear and distinctive styles. And all the pottery that was coming out was similar to, and this is the local jargon that's called Ashdod One-ware, which means that it is from the 11th and 10th centuries, meaning time of David, Solomon, maybe even before the time of Saul. So we know the time period. What else did we find here? We found olive pits that were sent for carbon dating, and they also confirmed such an early date. We found animal bones, and I quickly went through a slide up before from a site called Isbit Sarta. Isbit Sarta, we can go back to that real quickly just so you can see what it is. Isbit Sarta was an excavation done right near Tel Aviv. You can see here where Isbit Sarta is relative to Khirbet Qeiyafa. They found a small site they called a settlement site that they believe was Israelite because they found a small ostraca that had Proto-Hebrew letters. It was definitely not Philistine because there's no Philistine pottery. They have these large pits that they find in many other Israelite settlement thing. But what's so interesting here is that the archaeologist who was doing his master's degree on this site also collected the animal bones. And one of the things they found in this site that there was an absence of pig bones. No pig bones at Isbit Sarta. Who was this young archaeologist that did his master's? None other than Israel Finkelstein. Or we can call him Finkelstein I, not to be confused, because Israel Finkelstein went on to become one of the most important archaeologists of this time, of what we call the times of the judges in settlement. Israel Finkelstein excavated in Shiloh and many other sites. He conducted a survey in that area. So he already comes with quite a good background in it. And I said that's before 1995, when he sort of changes his attitude toward the biblical narrative. So as the excavation continues and expands, they start to find more and more. By the way, get back to our animal bones. In Qeiyafa, no pig bones. To contrast this, in all of the Canaanite and Philistine sites, when we've collected the animal bones, we find up to, and sometimes more than 25% of the animal bones are pig. And therefore, this is a very big distinction when we find the sites. They found metal objects and weapons. They found a number of other very interesting sites, but they also looked, when they had excavated enough, they could see something about the planning. And you can see here how the entire hilltop is built with a fortification all the way around. We call this a casemate wall. Casemate wall means that each one of the sections of the wall is like a small chamber that are connected together. Now, this is very useful practically because you can use each room either as a storeroom or as a guard room. It gives you an extra buffer if, let's say, one of the walls is breached. There's another section of a wall that can be used as fortification. But regardless of that, this is a style that we find specifically in Judean sites. This is Tel El Natzbe near Ramallah. This is Khirbet Qeiyafa, which is one of the sites that Albright himself excavated in the early 20th century. So this is city planning that fits the model of this region. So what do we have? We have casemate, we have city planning, we have animal bones, pottery. What else could indicate what the ethnic identity of these people were? We found an ostrakon, which is a piece of pottery that has writing. Now, it's kind of hard to look at it. They gave it to one of my teachers, Chagai Mizgav, for about a year and a half to look at it, and he basically came up with gibberish. But once they published it, it went around and everybody got a go at it. And there have been a few suggestions, but I will share with you now the one that was given by Professor Gershon Galil of Haifa University, who I think gives one that helps us with understanding who these people are. It begins with the word in Hebrew, al ta'as, as translated here, you shall not do it, but you shall worship the God, or El, judge the slave and widow, judge the orphan and the stranger, meaning that some type of a moralistic statement to be good to those who are unfortunate. Okay? And it has the word shofet and ani, and there's so different things there, yatom. So it's clear that it's not necessarily biblically oriented, but what we can say is the following. If the correct reading is ta'as, from the verb ayin shin hey, that's very interesting, because in the Bible we have another verb that means to take action. This is obviously not to take action, and that is pa'al, pei ayin lamed. And we have in all the corpuses in every single inscription from Canaanite sites, we have found only the alternative reading, which leads most scholars to believe, most scholars to believe that asa, tas, is not Canaanite. It's Hebrew. It's what the language the Israelites are going to speak. So to summarize, who were the inhabitants of Khirbet Qeiyafa? The city planning casemate walls seem to indicate that they fit within the context of the Judean lowlands and highlands. The pottery is from the 10th and 11th century, when they invited Ilan Meir, who's the excavator of the neighboring site, Tel Sefi, which is the Philistine site. He takes out the pottery and says, guess what? It's not Philistine. There's not one piece of Philistine pottery here. It can't be Philistines. This is interesting because when Israel Finkelstein shows up at the site, and I do recall this in 2009, the first thing he said was, it's got to be Philistine. That's what he said then. He, by the way, changes his mind later on. Why does he say it's got to be Philistine? He said, the map. That based on his looking at the map of how the map is designed, in a second we'll show it to you, this is the land of the Philistines. If there's going to be anything that's so built up at that time, it's got to be Philistine. Why is that? You should already know the answer, because at this time, there's no other entity that could have built up a organized, well-built site that I haven't even spoken about what it's for, but in this valley of Elah, it had it was almost like a fortress. Now, why was it only settled for 3 years and not three levels and not for many, many years? For a very simple reason. There's no good water source. There's no sufficient water source to sustain a real city. Where are there springs? At the nearby sites of Azekah and Socho. So Azekah and Socho are known cities nearby. They are used to protect the area normally. Qeiyafa is settled at a time, and we'll have to try to speculate what changes at this time, that there was a particular need to put a garrison and their families, obviously, to be situated in the center of the Elah Valley. So as I said, Finkelstein thought it was Philistine, but every other indication seemed to say that it is the that's Israelite or Proto-Judean. I mean, pick the what you've preferred to use. So what was it called? If this is a site, and it's at the time of the Bible, shouldn't it be mentioned in the Bible? Well, Yosef Garfinkel opens up the Bible and seems to find a solution. You see, in every other site in this region, Lachish, Maresha, Tel Zait, and I can continue the list, there's one gate. And it makes sense to have only one gate because a gate is the most vulnerable place, and you don't want to have more than one. In this site, they found one here to the west and one over here to the south. And thus, we have two gates. Why is this interesting? Because we open up the Bible to the story of Samuel, and we read about, as I said, the event that took place just below, and that is the battles of David and Goliath. And it says there, the Philistines assembled their forces of battle. They massed at Socho of Yehuda and encamped at Ephes Damim. We do not know what Ephes Damim is. Is it a place? Is it a status? Are they ready to go, maybe? Between Socho and Azekah. So we saw that Qeiyafa is near Socho and Azekah, and some people have said that maybe this site is actually called Ephes Damim. That's not what Garfinkel said, though. Saul and the men of Israel massed and encamped in the valley of Elah. They drew up the line of battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stationed on one, the Israelites stationed on the opposite hill, and the ravine between them. And what happens? There's going to be a battle. Before we get to the battle, let's look at the list of cities in this region, which are normally brought in their geographic order. Joshua 15:33 to 36. In the lowlands, in the Shfela, this region, Eshtaol, Torah, Ashna, sites that we think we know where they were. Sanoach, En Ganim, Tapuach, Anam, Yarmut, Adulam, Socho, Azekah. You can see Socho, Azekah, our friends are right here. And then Sha'arayim. What does Sha'arayim mean? Two gates. Adutayim, Gederah, Gderotayim. Some people have suggested that this site is one of those others. We do not have the identification of every single one. If it's a major site, it should be one of these towns. So maybe it is Sha'arayim. And that is the suggestion of Yosef Garfinkel, the archaeologist that excavated. But it doesn't stop there, because let's go back to our story of David and Goliath. So David ran up and stood over the Philistine, grasped his head. You can go back and read the whole story. It's quite dramatic when you get there, but I think we all know the story. Grasped his sword, pulled it from its sheath, and dispatched him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their warrior was dead, they ran. Where did they go? The men of Israel and Judah rose up with a war cry, and they pursued the Philistines all the way to Gai. This is probably a typo in Septuagint. It says Gat, up to the gates of Ekron. The Philistines fell mortally wounded along the road to Sha'araim, up to Gat and Ekron. So what would this be? Let's look at the map again. Here's Azekah, here's Socho. So the battle took place in the valley in between. The Philistines ran across this dotted line back into the land of the Philistines to Gat and to Ekron. What do they run on? They run on a road. It's a road that's still there today. What would this road be called as? The suggestion here is this is the road to Qeiyafa, or the road to Sha'araim. So the name Qeiyafa, which is the modern name, which probably just means the beautiful hill, or sweet hill, or something like that, would be the Sha'araim. So what do we have at this point? We have a site that is from probably 10th, 10th century, that was built for a particular reason by an organized and strong central government. This is not something a small farming village builds. You can't build something like this without previous planning, without enough resources to do so. Okay, it's not Philistine. It's theoretically not Canaanite, because we have no indication the Canaanites had such a need and a presence in this region at the time. And so the suggestion of the archaeologists is that this belonged to King David. Okay, and this is David and Solomon that built a fortification that they may have even used for a cultic site, or they may have used it in addition as not just a fortified site, but also as maybe a palace to strengthen the hold of the area. And so he has, you can see, published both in English and in Hebrew, and so forth. And this would be a reconstruction of how we would imagine what Qeiyafa would have looked like during its, as I said, short but probably important time of being built as a local, regional, quasi-city fortress. I would like to add another possibility before we go into what Finkelstein would answer. But in that the pottery, I said, is 11th and 10th century. If this belonged to David, why is it omitted from the Bible? Why doesn't the Bible clearly say he built fortified cities, like it says Rechavam, his grandson, is going to build, and so on? I would like to give, and I don't have the time to fully explain all the reasons for it, maybe that it was Saul that actually, if again, assuming the biblical story is representing an authentic memory, maybe it was Saul. Saul was a very, very big king. I mean, according to the Bible, he ruled for almost as large an area as David did. And the Bible only says, very interestingly, that Saul ruled for 2 years. But obviously, you couldn't have done everything Saul did in just 2 years. There was an intentional omission, or just a sleight of hand, a mistake. This goes back to the last class that we had together. That there's some type of a lacuna there. And I would suggest that Saul was either king for 22 or 32 years, not 2 years. And someone was intentionally trying to, let's say, minimize the importance of Saul. And so I think it would be very likely or understandable that if Saul built this, and in a moment I'll give a suggestion of when he could have built this site, giving it the name Sha'araim, after it was abandoned, in a moment we'll say when it was abandoned, Nobody remembered it because, again, the Bible's written by Davidian scholars and writers, and therefore they're not interested in making Saul look any greater than he needed to be. What would be the context in which Saul would have built up a fortified site there right after the battle of David and Goliath? He says, okay, they've won the battle. You need to hold the territory. You're still worried that the Philistines are going to pour over the hills of Azekah. And if you one day will go there physically, we'll be able to show you this geography. It's hard to do so virtually. But the building of this site enables you to protect from two different directions. And that's the reason you need two gates, because each gate goes down to another part of the valley, which takes a turn, like an S turn, going past Azekah. And so I'm suggesting that Saul builds this. David may have used it for a few years, and that relates to what we're going to see. And therefore, the pottery, David and Solomon and Saul are more or less the same time. But it says in the Bible that David already conquers the city of Gath, where he had already personal relationships with. He didn't necessarily have to conquer them, but he took it over. And once the kingdom of David is no longer at war with Gath, either by conquest or by treaty, there's no reason to have a fortified site inside the Valley of Elah, which is farther into the Judean frontier. It's inland, and they can go back to having a city up on Azekah, which is on the hill closer to the Philistines, and therefore this place was just abandoned, which is what the archaeological evidence would show us. So what do we have to summarize? Is that we have this site that, according to the archaeologist Garfinkel, belonged to David, maybe even to Solomon. I'm suggesting that it could be Saul. Finkelstein will come along, and I just listened. He published it in a few places, but it can be he gave an interview just about a few months ago, which I just listened to last night, and he says he thinks it's still a group of Canaanites. It can't be Israelites because the Israelites did not have enough power. David wasn't as strong enough. He doesn't deny there was a David. He says, yes, there was a David, but he was small, he was local, he didn't have the ability to build such a site. And so the debate goes on that we still do not have this, but we all understand now how Qeiyafa has really challenged the notions that have been suggested up until now. Now, beyond this, we also found some very peculiar finds at Qeiyafa. We don't have the time now to go into all of them, but you can take a look at some of them here. These seem to look like mini models of temples. This looks like an altar, a four-cornered altar, maybe with some type of menorah. I mean, your imagination, obviously. Garfinkel, coming from the world of prehistory, threes a few lines, and that's enough already to speculate. We're talking about something much more, maybe even a head of a god, maybe even the God of Israel. Okay, these are things that go well beyond the scope of what we're doing here, but you can see just from the pictures of all the different scholars, and these are archaeologists came from all around the world that came to the site to see what's going on, all are interested in studying. Now, I know there was a lot of details here, but to some and Garfinkel has continued to branch out and try to claim that the different findings teach us about how the Temple of Solomon would look like. This has been severely critiqued by Finkelstein and others, and the debate continues. So this is Qeiyafa, this tiny little forgotten hill in the Judean hills, lowlands. In a few years, it's going to be completely surrounded by built-up area, which is quite hard for some of us lovers of nature in the area. It's going to be built up all around it, but we need to find places for people to live, so they're going to give a park in this area, so it's not going to be touched per se, but it won't have the same view. And so now, as we come to an end, and there'll be plenty of time now for questions and discussions, this site, which initially was just this speculation of Sar Ganor. By the way, this over here is Yehuda Dagan. He's the guy that missed it. Whoops, sorry. The one here in the corner, the blue shirt. He's the one that missed. But he was quite supportive of all the things that were found and quite excited about them as well. What we can see now is that this site, I think the most important thing that it taught everyone is that even though, people came with such clear and opinions on either side, that realizing archaeology, there's still hundreds of sites that are left to be discovered, and this debate, discussion, and field is going to remain open for definitely the next 10 years, but probably for much more than that. So that brings to conclusion our short talk this evening. I am more than happy to clarify. I see lots of people, there's no way I could answer all the chats, but I'm more than happy to take the time in answering any type of question or comment at this point.
Altshul, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. It was a very it was so clear and so well built. I mean, I know the site. I was guiding students there for quite a few times, and yet it was very inspiring listening to you. So thank you very much on behalf of myself and on behalf of everybody. I'm sure people enjoyed it very much, and I can see so on the chat as well. So thank you very much for taking the time and your willingness to answer the questions. And of course, donations are appreciated as always. And that's for the first time in this season, I'm saying that. So yeah, okay. Oh, Alvin says that you have to leave. Alvin, goodbye. I hope to see you again. Bye. Thank you for taking the time and joining us. And it was great having you each time again and again. So Altshul, we have a few questions here. So let's see.
Happy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the beginning was sort of, general. I'm looking for the first actual question.
I saw that someone wanted to see what Qeiyafa means.
Okay.
They're not 100% sure, but it's very similar to the word that means like sweet or beautiful. Like the Hebrew kef, but it's a similar source, and that would mean that we're talking about, but it just be a beautiful place, which it was probably an orchard in the more recent centuries, and that's probably where it got its name.
Okay, thanks. Okay, now then there was another question. I see all the private and non-private, and wait.
If there's anybody who would like,
okay, yeah, okay. Glauco asks, where are the stones of all those walls of Khirbet Qeiyafa held together with some kind of mortar? Is the kotel a kind of a dry wall?
Yeah, they had a type of mortar at the time, but the strength of a wall was normally given by the size of the stones, and therefore near the gates there would be very, very strong stones that would be able to protect the area. So that would be the but they had a type of a mortar they would put it in. It was like made of lime. One of the things that I excavated, I was there, was actually a lime pit. A lime pit is where you basically make a very, very hot fire and you burn limestone, and with the lime you mix it in with sand and with others, and you make an adhesive. So that is something they had back then as well.
Great. Okay. Well, this is the question I believe you already sort of answered, but yet Harry asked, so what would be the purpose of the two gates?
The two gates, as I said, normally a site has one preferred area. The gate is usually in a back position, like you would want to have a gate that's not open that's accessible but not vulnerable. In this case, and you're all invited to come and see at the site on your own, is that you can see, and maybe I'll be able to get a view of this, is that when you're looking out to the Elah Valley, there's the both sides, the southern access and the western access are separate roads. So basically you need both gates in order to have proper access. I suggested there was even a third gate, but they haven't excavated towards Yarmout and Beit Shemesh because that also was a separate road. This is more like on a crossroads overlooking the valley, and therefore if you're both sides would be necessary, again, if it's more military as opposed to civilian or domestic.
Okay, great. Dale asks, how does Finkelstein explain that Pa'al word if it was Canaanite?
He says, listen, we don't have every single piece of Canaanite literature. Canaanite literature must have been more. It's not definitive. The entire field of linguistics can't definitively tell us an ethnicity. The languages of what we call Proto-Semitic, Israelite, Moabite, Judahite, Ammonite are very, very similar. They're in both the style of writing and in word usage. So it's not definitive. It looks like it's in the right direction. And when you meaning if we would just find an inscription or just find the lack of pig bones, which, by the way, Finkelstein has rescinded that claim. He says we found a lack of pig bones in other ethnicities as well, and there can be other explanations. It's not something that's definitive anymore. But the fact that we find all these things together really posed a problem. And I can prove this is a problem because I can show where Finkelstein, over the course of his articles, has softened his position. As he started with, it must be Philistine. I remember when he said it, I was there, I heard it, to now where he says, well, it looks like it's Canaanite. He actually says it may belong to the northern tribes. He says maybe it belongs to the northern tribes of Israel, not the southern tribes, because they may have had a strong kingdom at the time. But the pottery is too early for a strong northern kingdom. So he'll have to put that as another chapter in his book, because it's not in the Bible. The northern kingdom develops after David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. This would mean that there was a strong northern kingdom at the time of David and Saul, which is fascinating. Again, it's a possibility. We shouldn't be dogmatic in saying, oh, we know everything because the Bible's saying it. And if you're going to go into this field with an open mind, then that should be entertained as a possibility as well.
Yeah. And this is exactly his claim, that there was actually a strong northern kingdom which existed prior to what is believed to be King David, and there was no actual United Kingdom. Well, we already had Finkelstein as a speaker on If I Educate, but not on this. It was talking about Megiddo, but he introduced that idea back then. Okay, so Karen's question is, how can there be idol worship items in the time of King David and King Solomon? Okay,
this is an easy one. Have you ever opened the Bible and read what the prophets are saying? The prophets in every single time period are complaining the people are worshiping idols. Every single time period. In every single excavation that we have of First Temple period, we find what we would call today small little idols. Okay, now we have to understand what the context is. In the ancient world, they didn't have our understanding of modern medicine. We're talking about less than 50% of every birth will get to adulthood, which means that if you have the threats of wild animals, health issues, enemies, you're going to try to pretty much use anything you can to protect you. So you may worship the God of Israel, but you're also gonna, it works for the Moabites, works for the Ammonites, you're gonna have alternative solutions. And this is something which we can understand. I don't want to insult anybody, but we're just gonna compare it to looking at a horoscope or not necessarily alternative medicine, but I'm saying it's like trying to cover all bases. It is an affront to the God of Israel, and obviously the prophet saw it that way. But I think from virtue of the fact there's so many complaints of the prophets, this just shows you that people were doing it. In the Second Temple period, by the way, we have a complete void of anything like this. Meaning, and this really does represent what the rabbis were saying, that in the First Temple period, there was an abundance of idol worship. In the Second Temple period, the problem wasn't this. They were all worshiping God, but everybody thought their way of worshiping God was the only and true way, and that created its own set of problems. But yes, there are definitely, meaning, I don't know that we can interpret the finds the way that Garfinkel does in his book, that he tries to say specifically how they connected to the temple, and maybe this was an image that was supposed to be like the image of the face of God, but we know of this, and we have even more than this in a site which is in Sinai, and interestingly, one of the only archaeological remains that were ever repatriated. We gave this back to the Egyptians. They found a cultic site from the biblical period that said to the God of Israel, using the private name of the God of Israel, and his Asherah and his consort, with a picture of a figure which has a bull head and a female and a male figure. So go figure, and this is just there are many more of these. There's inscriptions there. But it says there also of Shomron. So it goes directly to the northern tribes and skips over Israel. Israelites from the northern Israel were going to Sinai, similar like to Elijah, and were worshiping the Lord of Israel and his consort. So things weren't all kosher there, and we have to understand that that even though, again, there's an ideal and there's the reality, which is often very, very different.
Right.
Okay. Any more questions?
Okay, next one. Yeah, Gail wrote the model you showed shows a large building in the center of the site.
I didn't get to everything. Unfortunately, the hour you gave me wasn't enough.
Yeah.
There was a very large, and I really wanted to keep that because I don't want to keep anybody beyond. And if anybody has to go, that's lovely seeing you, and look forward to seeing you back here. That being said, they found a massive structure in the middle, which we thought initially was from the Greek period. My expertise is classical archaeology. Actually, I did a master's in classical archaeology, and therefore I was part of a team that came there with Guy Stiebel, who, if you haven't had him, he'd be great for something like this. Guy Stiebel, he is now the archaeologist. He's in charge of Masada. We went there looking for Alexander's palace. We assumed that there was some type of a fortress from the time of Alexander. We didn't find that. As I said, we found a Byzantine farmhouse. That's what we found. But what they also found were the foundations of a large building from the Iron One period, from the time period of David and Solomon, which was interpreted by Yossi Garfinkel as being some type of a building related to the kingdom. Again, if it's just a garrison, you don't necessarily need like a donjon from the Crusader period. You don't need necessarily to have a inner fortress. If you have a king, he needs a place that he would be able to hide out and be protected. So this is part of that explanation. This particularly was talking David and Solomon, but as I said, if it's Saul, it works as well. There's no reason that Saul wouldn't have done the same thing. So There was something building, and there are many more things about this site again that I wasn't able to touch on. I related to the finds that were directly relating to the ethnicity of the people that were there and the dating of it, which are the two main issues that created such a disturbance to the lower criticism, the lower chronology, the chronology of Finkelstein and his school of thought.
Okay. Steve asked, how did the people earn a living Was regional commerce an important factor?
One more time.
How did the people earn a living back then?
How did people learn a living?
And was a regional commerce an important factor?
Excellent question. Number one, they were farmers. Okay, we're talking about local subsistence farming with a very limited amount of international trade, national and international trade. I can compare this to, let's say, the late Bronze period, where there was an abundance of international trade. We have pots from Cyprus that were probably, there was a lot of trade with Cyprus. Cyprus was probably a source of copper. And this leads to a whole other question. When that copper was no longer available, it looks like copper that was either in Jordan of today, in a place called Funon, and the copper mines of Timna, which my friend Erez Ben Yosef is finding things there. And by the way, if you haven't gotten, he'd be good also for this.
We had him.
Okay, so Erez and I, we did the tour guide course together many years ago.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he thinks that he found evidence of copper mining that is at the same time as Solomon, and therefore somewhat related, which Finkelstein says is completely speculative and not. But what we can know is that I think the question of commerce and in being an agrarian society, most people live near the fields. Okay, and that creates for us, which are used to metropolises from Las Vegas to Atlanta to whatever, when you have large cities, there's a middle class, a commercial class. There isn't a developed middle class in this biblical society. There's basically let's say, the class of the rulers, again, developing as time goes on, and that's part of the debate. But most people live near their farms, which means that we shouldn't expect to find large cities. Cities that just don't exist at that time. That a city will have the king, his men, and a few merchants and a few wealthy landowners that may also have a house closer to their fields, but that's it. You don't have a large developed middle class, which is something that I think changes our perspective of what the size of cities should look like. Meaning Finkelstein is coming and saying, oh, there's no big city here. I don't expect to find a big city. I think people are living in their small farmhouse near there. Somebody's asking for my email, and I'm happy to share it with everyone. It was actually on the last
last slide, but go ahead and write it.
Also, Julia has it, and she is more than welcome to share it. Anybody? Of course.
But if you put it on chat now, that will.
Yeah, I'm putting it on now, and it's there.
Yeah, I can see it. Altshul1@gmail.com.
@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes. Okay, there is a question. I think this is a great question, and I'm not sure there is an answer, but go ahead. Okay, so Larry asked, what find or finds would allow you to feel that you had an answer?
Okay, I'll tell you this. Archaeology is a study of material culture of ancient past. It is a tool for understanding the past. It's a tool for historical discoveries. It can't prove anything, meaning you can't prove the biblical story. The best I can offer is I can show you authentic context. I can show you that at the time of Abraham, Hebron looked like the Bible is trying to describe it or not. Meaning, I can also say that Hebron didn't look that way. But even if I found an inscription that says Abraham, son of Terach, wife of Sarah, it's very cool, and I'd be very excited. But that doesn't tell me the story happened the way the Bible does with any type of. That being said, and by the way, I can. It's on actually hidden on this lecture, which I've given in different ways. There are there are dozens at this point, if not hundreds, of artifacts that relate directly to events and individuals mentioned in the Bible. Unfortunately, not from David's time, not from Saul's time, but from just 50 to 100 years later. We have stamp seals with names of people in the government going back to the time of Hezekiah. According to Eilat Mazar, she found the seal belonging to King Hezekiah.
Well,
But
even
not,
prior, even prior to that, to Yeroboam II.
We have Eilat Mazar, who unfortunately just passed away. If you haven't heard, I mean, she was a great loss to the field. Very gracious. Every time I spoke with her, was willing to explain and share whatever she had. She found 2 stamp seals in the city of David with the specific names of 2 of the ministers of the last king of Judah, of Zedekiah, Gedaliah ben Pashhur and Yochal ben Shlamiyahu. Now, those are names, not common names. That's not John Smith. Those specific names are found in chapter 37 and 38 of Jeremiah, and they're the ministers of the last king. We find them in the context of the destruction of the burning, the conflagration of the city during the time of the Babylonian conquest. So, again, that's a few hundred years later. It's very specific. So, again, it doesn't prove that the stories with Jeremiah took place, but it gives us a snapshot of something that's very specific. And I have dozens of examples just like that one. So you're asking again. I'm not going to make the audacious claim that it happened exactly the way the Bible says. That's a matter of belief, a matter of proof. But again, the proof that, let's say, a Protestant minister would be wanting to show his congregation is not what I'm necessarily looking for or claim that I could offer. But as archaeology is a study, we can show context. I can show you large cities from the time of from the biblical period, and I can show you how the things that are there are specifically related to the reality of life during that period, like we spoke about in idol worship and like many other things. But we should not create expectations or that we're going to find the Magen David, that we're going to find David's, a shield that says David, son of Jesse. I don't think that, and even if we find that, it doesn't necessarily prove the stories took place the way that they are described. They could be exaggerations, even from a person from belief. The Bible was trying to show that they were larger than life, and that was their point. The Bible never claimed to be historical reality, so we have to sort of balance ourselves between them. And at the end of the day, those of you that might be feeling, well, so what does he think? Did the stories happen or they didn't happen? Listen, they're sources of inspiration for us from now till eternity. The things that we can learn from the stories go well beyond their historical context and reality, and we have to. I think that's, and I think the lessons that we learn from David, particularly David, who was not the perfect king. That's one of the amazing things about Jewish literature. The Bible, particularly the Jewish way of reading it, is that most of our heroes had not just the Greek tragic flaw, but had unbelievable flaws. And we are meant to learn from them and from their flaws. So and again, why would they make up, if it was made up, why would they make up such awful things that they did? If they're coming to glorify David, why would there be these stories there? Because the point is not to glorify everything David did. The point is to have us learn from these great stories and these great people who were challenged as humans just as we are. So that's more or less, but that sounds like already an introduction to a different topic. Let's get back to archaeology and talk about some bones and dirty pottery. Okay, Julia, you are muted.
That's true. Okay, I'm muted. Okay, So
Okay.
speaking of future possible presentations, Adele wrote, could you share with us in another presentation these details of findings that link to the biblical period? So
More
this
than
is
happy to.
definitely, yeah, definitely a great topic for another presentation. And we have a question by Harry related to this presentation. How could you know if someone just did not put down a fake seal? Okay, speaking of these
Okay.
seals of...
Excellent question. When you excavate, one of the things that you learn how to do is identify when things are in their original deposition, we call in situ, and when things have been disturbed. When things have been disturbed, it looks different. Okay, the earth is packed differently. They're different colors. Things, it's almost impossible not to have modern material mixed up in there. A beer bottle, a bottle cap, a battery. When you see it mixed up and disturbed, you know it. When it's in its original deposition and found in situ, again, in situ doesn't mean that it is as it was in the Iron Age. It means it is as its position the last time it was disturbed by humans. Okay? And that's when it's covered over. And it's part of the archaeologist's job to determine when that was. A building could stand out of use for 50, 20, 100 years and then be covered over by debris and forgotten. So the pottery at the floor might be from that interim century. Or it could be just the best thing is a violent destruction. Violent destruction is wonderful because when you have violent destruction, everything is covered over and messed up and burnt and sealed. So that's why Jerusalem is a very big problem, because Jerusalem, other than by the Babylonians in 586, lasted from around the time of David, okay, let's say around the time of 1000. So about for 500 years, it was never properly destroyed. And that makes it so difficult to be able to determine when exactly things were for. I think we could say it's fortunate for the people they weren't destroyed, but for us archaeologists, we love to have a violent destruction because that shows us exactly when things happen. And people are asking about the olive pits. Again, when you find things in their original deposition, olive pits don't sink down 3 meters into the ground or a meter into the ground. We find them within the dirt, undisturbed, with pottery from the 11th century. It's from the 11th century. Again, when you, I don't have the time now to explain how carbon-14 dating works, but the isotope, which is unstable, breaks down, and eventually we're able to measure using a chemical and a feature of carbon that we're able to measure exactly when the last time this organic material breathed air. That's basically what it does. And so that's pretty close. It means that it's when the olive tree died, where it was picked from the olive tree, and we can know that to, now it's complicated how we do it. We can know that to the more or less the range today of about 100 to 150 years. So we can't, so I would say to Finkelstein, you can't know exactly because it's within the range. Finkelstein will tell, no, when it's in the range, it's here. Because you take, let's say 10 examples and you use all of them to more or less narrow the range. The other issue is that when you send some to Berkeley and some to Weizmann and some to Haifa, you get different results. And you have to send to multiple because every single laboratory that does it has a slightly different way of looking at it. But when you take all this in together, we can know it's from the early biblical period as opposed to Second Temple period, as opposed to prehistoric, and we're able to really use it as a tool to narrow it. We don't use it, it's not the exclusive way of determining dating, but using each and every other thing that I spoke about and more, there are a few more things that are able to assist us as well, we're able to come to a pretty good picture of when these things are from. Okay.
Okay, well,
anymore.
Awesome.
I'm still, I could
Yeah,
still
I
keep
mean,
going.
yeah, I can see that you're
I think
still active
I'm
and
sure we're
awake and
losing
full of
people. I'm
energy.
actually
So,
looking at a screen. I don't see how many people. 53. We're okay. We're still
oh,
got
we're
plenty of
okay.
people
About
here.
half of the people left, and the other half are willing to stay forever, probably. Okay, but anyhow, we ran out of questions on chat. So this is the time, when you're welcome to unmute yourself and talk to us. You'd like to, Steve, I can see
Okay.
you unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, great. What a fitting last episode for our first season. Asher, thank you so much for taking the
My
time
pleasure.
today. We realize it's about, 11 o'clock or something in Jerusalem right now.
It's 10:30.
10:30.
Oh, it's still early. Well, we're good for another 2 or 3 hours then, I guess.
I have my coffee.
Okay, Gail. Okay, any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Any questions for Asher about Khirbet Qeiyafa, King David, King Solomon, Finkelstein, and everything in between?
Asher, you had said that David was a local king. What did you mean by that?
As opposed to an international renowned ruler, as the Bible describes him as somebody that is coming in, that is battling the Ammonites across the Jordan, that has connections to the Arameans, that's fighting up near Evel Beit Macha, near Metula of today. The way that Finkelstein would like to see him is a chieftain who's ruling the area of Jerusalem and its farmland around it. And it's like more like a mafia boss than in that area, as opposed to like the beginning of some dynasty. So it's more or less that's where that's where the two extremes. Although there are those like the Scandinavian school, Thomas Thompson, others that believe he's completely a myth. If anybody that caught the picture that I had, that is the statue of King Arthur at Cornwall. So there are those that believe that that's the case with David, but as we find an inscription with the house of David, and as we're more aware of how the oral histories were preserved in ancient times, this is a new field that's been working more and more, we're realizing that you really can't make this stuff up completely. There's got to have some type of historical seed there, and from that it grows. Okay, so we don't know exactly what David was, and I think everybody, what happened was, and this, again, I never have the time to speak about it, during this time of Saul, David, and Solomon, we know, and this we know from multiple sources that come together, that the Egyptians and the northern kingdoms of Aram, Ashur, and others, and other great city-states, all were very, very weak. At this time, we have a weakening of all of the powers around them that created a vacuum. And basically, David and Solomon took advantage of this vacuum. Now, when we think of a king conquering a kingdom, we think of, again, like some type of King Arthur. Actually, it's might be closer to the movies, the Monty Python movies, of them just wandering around saying, "I'm the king." Like, who the king? You're the king. Yeah, that's why they call themselves the king. But it might be that when we think of a kingdom, we're thinking of conquering territory. In their day and age, it might be something much closer to the mafia type of ideal, that is just collecting, protection, as they call it here. It's protect, like it's not extort. I want to say it's extortion, but it's like you're saying, I'm the most powerful person, pay your tributes to me. That's more or less what it is. And that could have happened during this time when the Egyptian pharaohs were weak, the Aramean and the Canaanite city-states were also weak. And so if David had a strong army that was powerful enough to get to bring fear to the people around them, that's what it is. I mean, there's a whole other chapter here that we definitely don't have the time to speak about, and that is the Philistines. Because it seems that the real need for having the a unification of what we call the tribes of Israel was the threat of the Philistines. Meaning, as much as we'd like to think about the 12 tribes coming together after being separated but coming out of Egypt, it seems to be that the real impetus to get started at that particular time to become powerful as one entity was the threat of the Philistines. You can even see that within the biblical story about how Saul was the threat. The Philistines was coming up and collecting taxes in Beit El, in the center of the country. And David is seen by most to being a proxy king of the Philistines when he was in Hebron. And only when he leaves Hebron and goes to Jerusalem, he basically says no more Philistines, and therefore they come and try to attack him in Emek Rephaim, which is where I'm going to go back where I live, right in the Emek Rephaim area. That's where the Philistines came up to check out David, what he was doing. So that's part of a whole other set of stories that I think really enhance our understanding of the context in which David comes to be as I say, a local king, as opposed to a internationally renowned. But we really don't have a way now of knowing. What basically this site, like Qeiyafa says, is that if it is Judahite, then it clearly shows you that there is a central power that was in control and that had the resources to build something like that. It can't be what Finkelstein was talking about. It's not just a mere, tribal leader. It's something much more powerful. So,
I think it's also important, I think that the gap between the maximalist and the minimalist, let's say between Garfinkel and Finkelstein, is getting smaller and narrower because, Garfinkel is talking about a mighty king and Finkelstein is talking about a local ruler, but at the same time, Garfinkel says that probably the entire United Kingdom had about 5,000 people in it. So if we're talking about a kingdom of 5,000 citizens, if you wish, so maybe we're talking about a little local village. So maybe the difference is not so big. Yeah, maybe they do agree.
I think no, but I think what Qeiyafa teaches us is that we really have to wait for the next major find, and there will be. As I said, there are dozens of biblical tells that have not been explored. The reason they haven't is because of funding and interest, meaning it's just a question of and development. The only reason Qeiyafa was excavated is because of the development in the area. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had the ability to do so. So right now, what Yossi Garfinkel has done is he's gotten permission to go to Lachish and to other sites in that area to compare to what they're looking at Qeiyafa and hopefully better understand the region. Went back to Socho and looked at Socho again. So hopefully, it's very potential they go to a place like Tel Zayit, or they go to a place like what Ganor is looking at right now. He thinks he's found biblical Tziklag, where David was as an officer. You can see in recent press about that. So the potential of finding more things that fill up this story. It's like a big puzzle, and we're putting in the pieces, and we're moving the pieces around, and we're shifting them. But I think the picture, as you say correctly, Julia, is getting more and more clear, and the differences are converging. I don't think they'll ever converge because otherwise people, lose. Everybody wants to have their opinion. But they're definitely not as polarized as they did when they began.
Yeah, and each find, each new excavation adds more to our understanding, and sometimes to our understanding that we were wrong, because you just mentioned Tziklag, and I've been there like a few weeks ago, and for those who are not familiar, Tziklag is a biblical town which has to do with King David's story, which was identified about a century ago in a totally different location, much closer to Beersheba. And that was amazing, because if that town associated with King David is located down by Beersheba, so we're talking about a large kingdom indeed. And now Tziklag is being identified just a few kilometers away from Lachish, which means just a bit south from Khirbet Qeiyafa. And then if the new location of Tziklag is indeed the true one, so once again, we're talking about a smaller United Kingdom ruled by King David. So, you know, a new find and a new identification of an old location, which we thought we know, and now we have new understanding of that. So things are getting more and more complicated, you know, and that would make, and that makes things more and more fascinating. And you guys, you're welcome to come over here and make archaeological excavations. And as I know that quite a few of you would do happily if you could, and who knows what you will find, and maybe, you know, you will change your understanding of the biblical archaeology or Second Temple period or whatever. Who knows? Yeah. Thank you so much, Asher, for taking all this
my
time.
pleasure.
Laila Tov, and
Laila
see you
Tov.
around.
Have everybody
Take care in
have a
Jerusalem.
good
Laila
evening, a good summer, and we'll see you again next year.
Summer vacation and great
And let's hope
watermelon.
we can all see you physically in Israel, well, healthy in the future. We'd love to show every one of you Qeiyafa in person.
Yeah, right. And now when we know that you actually excavated Qeiyafa,
I spent a week inside of a lime pit. It wasn't too bad.
well, still, that's a hands-on experience. This is much better than, you know, I've seen Qeiyafa already excavated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Asher,
Okay. My
Marilee.
pleasure.
Wonderful
Thank you.
presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Class is over.
Okay.
School's out for the summer.
School's out for this.
Right. Yeah. You're all dismissed.
Malka.
Guys, on behalf of myself and Corona Malka, we are, you know her. She was around here ever since she made the Aliyah. She is constantly next to me, listening to everything. You don't always see her because she's behind the virtual background, but now here she is. And she sends her best regards, and both of us are looking forward to seeing you all in Israel, having falafel, malawach, lahoch, watermelon, whatever you want, coffee for sure, Coca-Cola, you name it. Thank you, everybody. Steve, it was amazing.
Thank you so much.
15,000 emails sent directly, personally to each and every one. And Ilana, you did all the mute, unmute, calming down, moderating.
I also sent emails and designed everything.
Exactly. You designed
I'm not
stuff.
just a muter.
No. I mean, you are the moderator. You are the one who told people, don't say that. Don't be rude. Be nice. Behave. You know, all that stuff.
I'm the teacher.
And you posted the presentations on the Jewish education, and you established the contact with Naamat, and you did so much. And on top of that, hopefully you will be the tour guide, tour operator, you will be the agent who will bring people finally to Israel.
I hope so.
Me too.
Sooner rather than later.
Definitely.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And
It has been a-
Anna, thank you for
Thank
all
you.
you
You should
did,
feel
all your
free to-
contributions, and
You should feel free to come to our schmooze if you ever miss us.
Okay, I will.
Sure.
I'm sure I will miss you, and I will join you on a smooth,
Schmooze.
Yiddish.
a schmooze
Schmooze fest.
session. Okay, I will definitely miss you all. I mean, guys, I've seen you twice a week, quite a few of you. Some of you left and came back, but some of you just stayed here, like Alan and like Reba and Pamela, of course, and Steve and Glauco and Harry and Alan and Larry and Harry, you helped me so many times with Fahrenheit, Celsius, Libras, pounds, whatever. You were always there. I mean, you always knew that, and you were like the Wikipedia, whatever we did not know, you knew it. And eventually you became an architect, right? It was amazing.
You haven't got my bill yet.
Yeah. Oh, and Barry, of course. Guys, it was amazing. Thank you all. Thank you for all your support and donations, and your support, like spiritual, on top of the financial. But it was so important. It really kept me occupied and busy and entertained and actually, like, working. I am a tour guide, and that's the best I could do.
Well, the journey is not over, Julia. This is just.
I'm willing to. I have more to say.
Right. This is just a way stop on the way, taking a break, and
We will enjoy the watermelon on the beach.
And I hope you can use these, Julia, like all the recordings. If somebody wants to see and wants a tour guide, you can say this is an example of work.
Of course. No, definitely. Of course, it is a great way to introduce myself and show my abilities, and exactly. But on top of that, I mean, the most important thing for me was just doing it, just the active part of it, and hopefully I will be using it in the future. And Ilana, you have to make it here. I know that you prefer malawach, so no problem.
I used to like shawarma more, but now I feel weird eating. So now it's malawach. I don't eat malawach anymore. Yeah.
Oh, okay, jachnun maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Julia will get ready in her mind. She's getting ready for all the VFI Plus tours. So
hopefully they'll happen. The October one, we're getting nervous, but
next step.
Yeah.
But I will try the falafel if you have a really good place.
We have a very good place. We just agreed, Pamela and myself, we agreed that the best place in Tel Aviv.
I'm there. I'll go. I don't not like it. I just don't like it.
Yeah. Okay. Julia, what are you going to have Noam do for the summer?
Well, actually, he was working lately with a friend of mine who is he's living here in the Moshav, and he is a constructor, so he needed a welder. Is it the right word? Welder. Okay. So Noam is actually a very good welder. He studied just on his own, and he practiced. So he's working as a welder now. And he also and a little bit of simple computer stuff, and he will be drafted in about 4 months. So I don't know what he will do for the next 4 months, but he will figure it out. Most of the time
does he know what he wants, what unit he wants to be in?
No, he wants to be in whatever related to computers. I assume that that's what he will do, but he is not like assigned yet to anything specific. But I hope they will use his skills. Yeah.
Do you get your choice when you're drafted?
No, I mean, you do have a list of like what you would like to do, but it does not mean that you will actually end up doing it. It's up to them. And then they have some tests in advance, both physical and whatever skills you have. And then they just decide. So sometimes you can understand the decision. Sometimes it does not make any sense. And yet, military it is. So we are quite nervous. Yeah. Yeah. We hope for the best.
Sam, is Shimshon up at the Golani Junction still being used?
Well, nothing's been used for over a year.
It was a tank maintenance base.
It wasn't used for a while before Corona. It hadn't been used for a while before Corona.
The reason I'm asking, that's where I did my first tour, was up there.
Yeah.
Julia, do you want to go to sleep?
Well, I don't mind. I think I'm going to drink just a little bit of wine, like a toast. And
we should have all toasted to you.
Yeah, actually, to all of you guys, but we did not prepare it ahead of time, so forget it. We will do it virtually. Imagine that we drink some wine here. Right. Thank you for the idea. Thank you, Ilana.
Everybody.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope to see you all in reality as soon as possible and talk to you, and all the best.
Well, Julia and Ina and I are going to get on are going to get together on the beaches of Tel Aviv. So I'll take pictures and then we'll.
Yeah,
and
you
show
are
it on
welcome
the
to join us.
schmoozes.
Yeah, we will be drinking a real coffee or real something. Yeah,
I want to see the pictures.
We will.
you will. Okay.
You got your polka dot bikinis ready?
Julia can wear one, not
Valerie.
me.
Oh, Valerie, I did not mention you. You were there always. It was so great having you. And you invited Joffrey. I saw him today. He was listening carefully.
Yes, he is.
Take care, everybody. I'm going to be signing off.
Take
Bye,
care.
Beth.
Laila Tov.
Laila
See you
Tov.
all.
Laila
See
Tov,
you in
Julia.
Israel.
Please.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Julia. Talk to you soon.